Hi, everyone. As you heard, my name is Abisola Oni. My friends call me Abby, and I now invite you all to call me that as well. Um, as Carmel mentioned, in late 2021, I was awarded the Flavio Belli Curator Award, and it has culminated in the exhibition and presentation of Being Plus. So many thanks to Toronto Outdoor Art Fair and Propeller Art Gallery, Flavio Belli, and all who have supported this launch. Thank you again for joining us from the comfort of your and safety of your homes. I'm beginning this event with a moment of reflection and acknowledgement of the land that we are on right now. Wherever you are, we are all living and working on sacred land. The land that I live on is land ceded in the Adjutant's Purchase, Treaty 19 of 1818, sold to the Crown due to the Mississauga's state of destitution, which was a direct result of the destructive settler colonial specter. I am a visitor on the traditional territory of Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabewaki, Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and many others. Each day I benefit from my connection to the land where I develop my artistic practice and from the legacy of the stewardship of the Indigenous peoples who have cared for this land since long before I arrived and continuously today. Please be mindful that we are only the most recent peoples who have had the responsibility to care for this land. And most importantly, we are being called to be in active solidarity with the Indigenous communities today. So without further ado, Being Plus presents an argument about our identities and our society and how these things intersect. But foremost, it is the artist who strengthened this argument greatly. So I'm so happy to introduce them to you all, or rather invite them to introduce themselves. So my first question of the evening is, thank you all, artists. That's just the first part, not the question. But I'd love to have you each introduce yourselves and please describe the history of your practice up until this point. To begin, maybe we could have Michelle Cieloszczyk speak.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Cieloszczyk. I'm a sculptor based in Toronto. So a bit about my practice. I've always been sort of artistically inclined. I ended up studying my first year at Concordia in ceramics, but I took a really earth-shattering sculpture course that sort of made me change my course. So I started feeling some limitations in clay, and I felt like sculpture was a medium that constantly continues to intrigue me, and it's really expansive on its conceptual reach. I just felt like I could communicate better through sculpture. And after my first year, I transferred to OCAD, where I graduated in 2019. And as I was experimenting and finding my style, I created a lot of work on waste, objecthood, and capitalism. I did a lot of mold making and used different kinds of rapid prototyping technology like CNC milling and laser cutting 3D prints. And by my thesis year, I had been engaging more actively with political art forms and started feeling like my practice was a bit too self-indulgent. And that led me to want to take on more radical social change through my art practice. So I began researching surveillance as my thesis work, and I created a bunch of walled installations touching on issues of border security. And after graduating, I had to adapt my practice, and I returned back to object-based works and was more fixated on policing as a primary issue, which I've been exploring for the past 4 years. So that's a bit about my practice.
Thank you for sharing, Michelle. Would anyone like to speak next, or? No? Okay. So Miles, could you speak a little bit about yourself and your practice up until now?
Yeah, totally. So I'm Miles. I'm from Hamilton, Ontario originally. And I moved to Toronto to my undergrad at OCAD University. I was studying printmaking. So I studied print for my undergrad and then really worked as a printmaker after that, both in like the commercial side, doing stuff at like, a run-of-the-mill print place, doing lots of like advertisements and stuff like that. And also doing some silkscreen work out of like Open Studio at 401 Richmond and, a couple other places. And then I decided to go to grad school in 2016, and I moved down to University of Tennessee because they have a really good print program down there. And I did that for like one semester, but I hated it, so I moved back to Toronto and applied to go to York University. And then in like the first month of being at York, I was like, I don't really want to make prints anymore. I've been making prints that were like trying to emulate paintings. And you can only push up against that border for so long until you start to feel like I started to feel like I should just, if those are the types of aesthetic that I'm looking for, I should just try and paint. So I dived in and it was great. I started working in oils, and then I made a lot of really bad paintings. And then I don't think I even made like a good painting until after I graduated. So, like shortly after graduating from York, I was lucky enough to get like a Toronto Art Council and Ontario Art Council grants. And that's where you can start to see some of the work that I've got in this show. And I started to get like a little bit more serious about, how I was going to control the type of imagery that I was working with. So I started hiring models and doing photo shoots and like taking a really hands-on approach to sort of every step of the process. And then, this year I got Canada Council, so I'm just sort of plugging away at that.
Do you want to speak a little bit about this aspect of your work, your inspiration from the Barbara Krueger piece?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So, like my work is a lot about, masculinity and how it's constructed and performed. So, I got really hung up on this Barbara Krueger piece, this silkscreen print, which reads, "You construct intricate rituals which allow you to touch the skin of other men." So, building off of that idea, I wanted to, take this into a more contemporary context and, maybe one that's a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more sensitive in the Krueger piece. Because, you can like look at these sort of like fraternity moments and stuff like that. And I think, I love that piece. It's really powerful, but I think, there's some nuance that can be explored. So, especially in like working class men, I'm looking at like, how addiction or, anyway, all the different ways that men can be intimate together, which is like a really sort of tense or nebulous or confusing, I think, for a lot of young men out there. Really difficult for them to sort of like explore that level of intimacy with each other and with themselves. And I just wanted to, build off of that singular idea from Barbara Krueger's work and, branch it out into my own.
Awesome. Yeah, I was really interested in that little piece of inspiration you shared with me. And it's always interesting to see how artists inspire other artists. So I wanted to bring that one up. I'm going to go a little back, so excuse this. But next up, do you think, Biba, you could speak a little bit about your work?
Oh, yes, definitely. Can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so my name is Biba Esaad. I'm currently living in Montreal, just recently moved here from Toronto. And I guess in a whole, my work sort of takes form in this exploration of an imagined queer future. And a lot of my work also takes form under the guise of the cyborg body or the hybrid body or this sort of site of possible being. So I would say more recently, I've sort of shifted into a few different mediums. Yes, I'm a painter, but I also do styling and textile work. And I also like to do paper making, and I like to sort of thread whatever idea I might have into all of these disparate mediums. My background is in fine arts. So I attended Queen's University, where I received a Bachelor of Fine Arts and a coupling degree in art history. And while I was there, I was really lucky, and I was actually the director of our 4th year thesis exhibition. So I got to sort of see both sides and understand the level of work. So thank you again, Abby, that goes into putting together an exhibition. While I was there also, I worked, I was lucky enough to have an internship with the Venice Biennale. And so I spent some time in Venice working with the National Gallery of Canada. So art history is definitely something that really informs my practice. And I think that I can talk about my work in a few different ways. I mean, I can talk about it in a process-based way when it comes to painting, specifically on the piece you're looking at here. I like to work in layers. I work in oil paint primarily, and I like to work large scale. This is actually a smaller piece for myself. It's 3 by 4 feet, but sometimes I go as big as like 10 feet, 12 feet. There's something really exciting to me about being able to take over a whole wall or have these sort of cyborg figures that are otherwise a reflection of those left out of society be such grand presences and overwhelm the exhibition space. And so I think that's another reason why the scale is quite important to me. But yeah, all in all, I work as a painter. I do printmaking similar to you, Miles, and I'm quite interested in your practice. And then I also work as a stylist here in Montreal.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Biba. I'm really fascinated by your practice. Like the cyborg is really a prominent theme right now in feminist theory, especially like post-colonial media theory. And I'm thinking when I first saw your work, I was thinking that my understanding of the cyborg definitely mostly relates to digital art arenas and the ways in which digital technology can like afford multiple possibilities in defining the self and multiple selves, especially like the cyborg figure in representing women of color and like their multiple subjectivities. So I wanted to ask you, like, if you could just speak a little bit about your experience of translating these ideas into like paint and pastel media, if you've ever thought about that.
Yeah, so I understand what you're saying completely. And I felt for a very long time that I was having a really hard time depicting this otherwise quite otherworldly digital sort of entity in painting, which is the most traditional, especially oil painting, like the most traditional medium. Like it's quite literally for white men, sorry. So I was like, how am I going to like do it this way? But then in the same right, when I looked to other mediums, I wasn't finding that it was really taking the whole of my idea. And I think one major reason why I shifted back to paint after going the digital animation route and learning all of this 3D stuff and blowing my brains a little bit, I shifted back to oil paint because I found that there's something really beautiful about nudging a figure into space and letting that figure come to being in its own right. So all of these works sort of relate to that idea of seeking definition. And in this way, they come to exist in their own space. So like I mentioned before, if I'm working and building these layers, often what I'll do, and what I did in this piece, Body and Flux, is once I feel confident that there's enough layers going on the piece, I'll take a step back from that piece and quite literally begin to rotate it. And eventually I'll start to sort of see a figure naturally emerging. And that's when I'll continue to draw and nudge it into space with paint. And in that way, I feel like it is reflexive of this cyborg, and this idea of coming into your own space, this other space, this future space. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but I feel like that's the best way I can explain it.
Oh, I hear you loud and clear. That's really fascinating because again, I would have thought, or I would have assumed that the digital is the way to go just because that's how we are thinking, that the digital is what gives all the possibilities. But it's very true that that your work comes to life in itself, even though it is a very analog medium. You still have your practice that somehow communicates the same thing, and that's really amazing. So here we have Miles' work again, and then next up we have Noah Lima. Noah was not able to join us today, but I will still go through his artworks for the audience. So yes, so these are watercolor, and I believe some of them include pastel and watercolor pencils on paper. I was drawn to Noah's work just by the colors and scale of the figures, I would say, are the top two things I was just like, whoa. We have had conversations where we have been kind of okay with noting Noah's work as having a kind of humorous effect, just because of the vibrant colors and scale. And he would agree with that term. Although it is very much relating to the experience of navigating gender identity or gender expression and identity in a world which seeks to perceive and presume and impose ideas about, or to impose ideas about the self onto the self. And so Noah's work really makes a critical investigation of that problem. And I also love just about the scale, the bodies being so magnified gives his work a kind of universal aspect, even though a lot of the stories that influence them are very personal. I was also inspired by that. Another artist who's unable to join us tonight is Roxana Parsa. Roxana makes paintings using acrylic and oil media. Her work is inspired by her experience as the daughter of Iranian immigrants, and it's very much relating to family, kinship, absence, and presence across diaspora. Yeah, it is also, like Miles, influenced by photographs, not taken by Roxana though, so that is the difference. These are home videos and photographs that are sometimes of figures that she has never met. And so that also plays a role in shaping the theme around absence, but also drawing these figures into her life right now as an alternate mode of remembering. I'm also really drawn to her ability to draw a connection to the person and space, but space as in a place that it has significant meaning. I was awestruck by this one painting, Woman at Night, when I first was putting together this exhibition. I love her use of color and how you can form a connection between the figure that she's depicting and the surroundings, i.e., where that is the flowers, and how she's very much, the figure is very much immersed in the space. Even the sky seems to be watching her. There's a little figure that I like to point out in the background as well. So yeah. And next we have Michelle Rodrigues, who is here to join us tonight. Hi, Michelle.
Hi guys, I'm Michelle. I also went to OCAD. I graduated in 2015 from drawing and painting. And then soon after that, I studied art therapy. That's where I learned about the therapeutic use of collage and its strength to bring out thoughts, memories, and ideas buried within our subconscious. Unlike the other Michelle, I think my work might be a little self-indulgent. I was drawn to the idea of burying and of uncovering meaning, which I do consistently while making these collages. I've dealt with communication learning disability my whole life, and the difficulty in being able to articulate what I'm thinking and feeling has often limited me. So I think that's also what inspired me to learn about art therapy. When I started making these collages, I felt I had delved into a different way of communicating. Creating layers upon layers of collage challenged my perfectionism and dealt with themes such as chance, caught in between creation and destruction. Recurrent images and text interrogated the social, cultural ideas of what it meant to be a woman, promises, disappointments, and what is sold to us as real and what life really is. So before this, I was mostly doing abstract painting. And then I started selling like these collages way more. And it's kind of interesting. A lot of these collages are inspired by sort of the idea of womanhood, which to me comes a lot from my own mother, of course. And just a little bit about that is that my mom is also like an immigrant and came to Canada and created a successful business in the hairstylist industry. And so where am I going with this? So I started selling to these upper class women who never really got my art before, but as soon as it started to include fashion magazine images, and I guess it drew them. But then I started pushing away from that. I found a lot of Good Housekeeping magazines in my basement that my mother had collected in the 80s and 90s. Going through those, that's how I realized where a lot of ideas that people have about women or that women have about ourselves actually exist within these magazines and ads. And, now it's kind of hidden, but in like barely 30 years ago, an image would actually say like, buy this perfume and a man will marry you and you'll be happy. Everything's dandy. And literally, so yeah, I have that one.
Really?
So it's really interesting. In the last 2 years of the pandemic, I've really been exploring this. And as you say, Abby, is like challenging it, but not necessarily, but I'm actually immersed in it. So I've also become a hairdresser in the last 2 years. I'm also like within the idea of shaping what a woman looks like and acts like. And I kind of have these two personalities of my artist self and then the self that's like supposed to be polite and, demure. So it's kind of interesting.
Yes,
Anyway.
thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing, Michelle. And yes, thank you for touching on the use of found imagery. I thought this was a really interesting aspect of your practice. It's so amazing that you're actually able to engage with those magazines that have the exact kind of discourse that you're trying to interrogate. And yeah, so that was definitely something I found quite amazing. I also noted that I feel like just using these archival documents, pretty much, you're also contributing to creating a new archive of ideas about just with the developing narratives that you create with your pieces. And I was wondering if you could even speak a little bit more to the aspect of how your works kind of develop over time.
Sure, if I think I understand the question correctly. So I make one collage, I perfect it in my eyes, make, a completed work of art, and then I completely cover it. So I do that about a dozen times within each piece. Over time, I started to realize the importance that text was playing within this. So as I would make these works, I would write down in a journal ideas that come to mind. And I've always kind of picked at sentences or sayings and not really understood them and sort of played with their meaning in my head. So for this one, easy as cake, like for example, I just wrote like a stream of conscious that came to mind, and some said, come, yes to go, easy as pie, piece of cake, problem, get a divorce, everything you ever wanted, peel here, make your home this, thanks mom, the future freaks me out, it knows if you, ding dang, dirty cookies. And so like, kind of like, I don't know, Dadaist poems would come out as I'm making these, and as I would scratch through the different layers, I would find these words that I put down, which had meaning then, but as I'm excavating, the meaning changes, and often I'll find sentences of words put together, sort of like a communication between me and the artwork. And I hope and I feel that the viewer can also have that as well, because our mind often fills in meaning for ourselves. So different people find different meanings within it that are sort of personal and introspective.
Absolutely, yes. Thanks for sharing. I definitely do take that away as a viewer, but it is interesting to note how the experience can be amplified, because when we met, and you read that little page, or that page to me, and that poem to me now, I had not drawn my attention to the little part of this piece that's up right here, easy as cake, that says "Thanks, Mom," in the center lower quadrant. I hadn't noticed that, but then as soon as you read that, it stands out. And so yes, I completely agree with that kind of developing narrative, and viewer interaction is plentiful in your pieces. There's so much to look at and pick apart.
Thank you. Yeah, I started with the spray paint. I started actually writing messages, so things that people had told me in the background, like weird ass things like "you smell like a mother," or "as long as he makes you come," or "you already have a daddy," like all this really ridiculous things. So I really liked that I could sort of share that, because I've always been, I guess, timid or not shy exactly, but
without openly, like, yelling it. You're communicating in it. You're communicating it in a very different way, in a very unique way. So, and it's your way, so it works for you. Well, thank you everybody for your introductions, and I did ask a couple questions, so that kind of was an all-encompassing section. But the next question I would like to present to everybody is, what do you believe is your role as an artist in society? Now, Being Plus is very much socially and culturally centered, so I'd love to hear your responses to that one.
I can answer it first. Can I be? I'm gonna be a little bit controversial. I don't think that art and artists really have like a definitive role in society. Like, I don't think that they're like, I know a lot of people will be like, oh, art is like a vehicle for change or like whatever. I don't really believe in any of that. And like, maybe I'm cynical, but like, artists are just people who like to make things, and they like to make attractive things, and they like to share those attractive things. So, like, for me, I guess the role is to just like, make something that looks good and is interesting, but also is like being authentic, and sort of like, I guess, reveals a truth. Because, like, if you start to look at like, if you start to make decisions about like what is good art or what is bad art, which is always super subjective, and everybody's going to have a different opinion about it for themselves. And I don't think there's like a universal good or bad. Just but anyways, when you're trying to make those decisions for yourself, and look critically, or if you want to look critically at art, I don't think you need to look critically at art either. But if you do, you're going to start to probably look at things and react to things that you feel are either revealing a truth for you, or something that you can recognize as true coming from the person who made it. So, I think like the role, if there is one, is to just sort of like find that level of authenticity, and then just sort of like start to pull out as much of that as you can. But like in terms of like something concrete, like a higher calling or anything like that, I'm not sure that exists.
That's
Absolutely, and I would agree with you. Oh, that's interesting. Michelle, do you have a rebuttal?
Controversial.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny to me because I have a very opposite point of view. I understand that there's limits to, like, for instance, having a political art practice, like you're still embedded in the art world. But I think the one thing that you can do is have conversations, and, having public exhibitions, you engage with people that aren't necessarily that into art. Even like you can meet total strangers and then be like, hey, did you know about this? And you have a conversation, and even for yourself, you're always learning and kind of developing. So for me, like, the ideas are very important, and I think maybe it comes down to what you personally find interesting. Like, you kind of want to mimic that. So for me, I love artworks that are super just reflect society and show issues in society that are like so powerful and overwhelming that like there you go, this person finally conveyed this issue and showed it to me in a way that makes me feel like it's very satisfying when an artist is able to communicate something that you experience in the world. Maybe it's dragging you down, making you feel sad or something, and the artist just conveys it so perfectly. Like, that's really beautiful to me. So yeah, I think, at least for myself, I see myself as an artist that wants to speak back to power. And I realize the limitations of that, but I think it's still possible, especially with conversations. And I also consider myself someone that likes to critique systems. So that then factors into my practice.
Right. And Biba, I think you were also going to say something.
Yeah, sure. I feel like I really disagreed with you, Miles, at the start, and then you got going, and there are some like concrete truths, I feel like, to what you're presenting. For me, I feel like I felt radically different for most of my life. I felt like, not that the artist is genius, because no one is, but that the role of the artist in society is quite important. And I think it can be a great marker for social change. I also think that what you were just mentioning, Michelle, about having these conversations that otherwise may not be feasible, I really enjoy that perspective. I really feel like art is for the masses, and not that you necessarily have to assign meaning to your work, but to have such a disparate group of people be able to jump in and create meaning for themselves based on your work is such a beautiful thing. Though that being said, in agreement with you, Miles, I do feel like there are such a great level of saturation because of social media that the role of artists isn't really valuable. Like it's tough to say if it's helpful or harmful at this point. Though in the same right, I think that it is entirely up to like really like case by case. Like you can implement things into your practice that are really revolutionary. Like I also do printmaking, and I've noticed that before I even start to print something, often I'll go through 30 sheets of newsprint, which is like so wasteful because they're just proofs and they're not actually for anything. So as a sort of like means to an end, I decided to start doing paper making. And so I have this really nice little circle going where I'll, make a print. It's probably not great. And then I'll tear it apart, add natural pigments, make a new sheet, make a print on it. It's probably not great, So I feel like in certain ways, like implementing things like sustainability, or like you mentioned, Michelle, having this political drive behind your work, those are the ways that we can still drive change.
Yeah, I feel like I sit somewhere in the middle as well. I'm not really sure. And in one way, I'm like, no one really cares. And like you said, Biba, there's such an oversaturation of people that call themselves artists in the world right now. And to your question, yes, I do enjoy hiding secrets in my work. I love the idea that upper class fancy lady is gonna have something that said like as long as he makes you come, like somewhere underneath, and which is something my mom actually said to me, and I was shocked. I was flabbergasted. So yeah, I like to think that my work has meaning. I don't know if it actually does. I find that someone who gets art gets it. Other people who don't really and just buy art because it looks pretty or looks cool don't. When I do someone's hair, though, they're like, "Ooh, I'm having my hair painted by a painter. That's amazing!" And I'm like, "Yeah, cool." So that's how it helps me.
Yeah, thank you all for that little discussion. I would say that even though there's varying opinions, between you and the rest of the art world, I would say that you each play a role in being plus for sure. You each communicate something unique to viewers, and that is non-negotiable, I'll say. But yeah, so I would say that at least. And because Being Plus is such a socially and culturally centered exhibition, as I mentioned before, I would say that inadvertently, even if you don't want to or don't believe in it, you are saying something. And personally, I believe it's important things. But truly, it's just your perspective. And that's why it's important, because I think art is, and as Biba, as Michelle said, it's about communicating, and it's about sharing perspectives that people may have not been exposed to. So with that, I just want to ask one final question to everybody, and that is, of the pieces selected for Being Plus, is there any one that you believe best fits the theme? It could be your own or somebody else's, but I'd love to hear at least a few or one or two responses.
I could share.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I really like Miles's piece, Bottom Rung, if you wanted to pull it up. Yeah,
I'll go as fast as I can.
It was the can one.
Oh, Bottom Rung.
Yeah. Oh, this one. Yeah. Yeah, so it captures two men hugging it out in a very evocative way. And I can easily picture the action in my head, like as if a video is playing. Like I can hear the sound of their chests colliding, and like maybe that like kind of pat on the back. And it seems also like some bad news was just dealt, because these moments of platonic intimacy are so sparse. So you almost feel like, what just happened? And the hug in my mind sort of plays out in like a short time frame based off of observation. But in the case of this painting, it's sort of permanent. It's like an eternal hug. It's also interesting to me that the man wearing a black sweatshirt, he's drinking, and I'm questioning why he's doing that in the midst of a hug. Yeah, so those are my thoughts and reflections on this piece.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to share a little bit about a piece that they think reflects Being Plus well? Or the spirit of Being Plus? No.
Yeah, I really
okay.
I really liked Michelle's piece, Promising Young Woman. You know, I think she did a really good job, you know, discussing the themes of it. But you know, for me, what really stood out is just sort of like how natural or like how easy these pieces look, which is not like easy and like it was easy to make, but like easy in like the, you know, like sprezzatura, like it has ease to it. And you know, like this is like the type of piece that like I can imagine, you know, you're like walking down the street and you've got like, you know, condo hoarding or something that's got like tons and tons of buildup of like posters and advertisements and graffiti, and it's been scraped off and painted over like a million times. And you know, like to recreate something that has that like that nice natural you know, like urban, but then mixing in all these like domestic imagery together, and then you know all this loaded imagery as well. I think it just sort of like really straddles a lot of different lines between, you know, like different types of aesthetics, and you know, for more towards the theme of the show, you know, like ideas of womanhood or gender and stuff like that. Anyway, I think it just really sort of like sits in this really interesting position between a lot of different ideas that it sort of manages to capture at the same time. It's really great.
Thank you, Miles. I'll just say one last thing for the sake. Oh, Michelle, did you want to say something?
Just saying thank you.
Oh, okay.
It's nice to have another artist to talk to you about our work, because I haven't had that in like the last, I don't know, for it feels like forever. So cool to have you all here.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just
sorry. I also wanted to say, Abby, with the question before, was I feel like you're what makes the artwork important. I think the work of the curator is sort of what makes all of us kind of have some more meaning. So thank you.
Thank you for saying that, Michelle. That really means a lot. And again, Being Plus is very much an argument that I'm putting forward, and I'm glad that it's been well received so far, especially by you, the artists. I hope I haven't missed anything when conveying your works, and I'd love for you to share if you have any ideas about that. I'll give you 1 second just to say we are running short on time, but is there anything that anyone wants to add to the way that I portrayed the work? No? Okay.
You did an awesome
okay.
job. I want to hire to help
Michelle. Thank you. One thing I will just say before we get into the questions from the chat is it was sad that we weren't able to install the exhibition in January. But one thing I would say that or the most important part I'd really say that we missed out on is just the scale of these works. Like, it's really amazing. Or even Easy as Cake is in the background of Michelle right there. And like, yeah, these pieces are, a lot of them, not all, but a lot of them are quite large. And I think that was also a deliberate choice that I made and that the artists made when they made these pieces. I think that they are almost overpowering, when you enter the room. Michelle's sculpture, like things like that. Although, of course, I've only had the pleasure of seeing Michelle Rodrigues's piece there, Easy as Cake. I did actually, Miles, see your work at United Contemporary Gallery last year.
Nice.
Yes. And so, yeah, and that's another thing. Those pieces were also so large. I hadn't been familiar with your practice before then. And so when I saw those pieces, I was like, oh my goodness, like, these are life-size men. That was my first thought. And so, yeah, thank you all for being here tonight. I would love to get into a couple questions from the chat here as time permits. I just have to find the chat again. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and maybe it'll be a little easier. Okay. So a question for Miles. Flavio asks, what kind of prints did you make, like, in your printmaking career? What was the type of print and techniques, and what were the subjects?
Yeah, so I work mostly in silkscreen, but before, when I was working just at like commercial print place, it was like UV set on like Coroplast or whatever, like Apple, Tellus, NHL, that type of stuff. And then the type of work that I do at Open Studio is more like artists run prints. Artist run center. So, I'm working with a lot of artists to sort of like create their vision. So, I've worked with like Luke Painter and Tim Pitzelak. Anyway, lots of other people. So, that one's a lot more like hands-on artists that don't necessarily work in print and then want to make a print run. And then, the studio that I work at now, Repetitive Press, it's like a lot of like activist work and like social justice type stuff, a lot of protest posters and demonstration posters, and then like a lot of band posters, and then stuff like printing bags for retail and stuff. It's like a wide net, but that's sort of the cross section. Mostly silkscreen.
Thank you. And then we have a question for Biba. This question is, you mentioned the oversaturation of the title of artist in the world right now. Do you think originality and style also hinders the emerging artist or an up-and-coming artist? Kareem has heard countless stories of people just quitting because an individual couldn't come to a conclusion of a set style or a sense of originality.
Interesting. I have a few different, I feel like, thoughts here, but I think that, like, truthfully, school is great. Not bashing school by any regard, but I don't think that you really learn how to form your own ideas in school. I think that you learn a lot of skills around that, but your ideas and your originality is something that just kind of comes within. And so what I do feel like goes on a lot in the art world recently is a lot of regurgitation. I think it's cool to reference artists, but it's clear to see when someone hasn't done enough research and history to understand where that idea originally came from. And so they're like referencing the copy of the original, not the, do you know what I'm saying? It becomes very muddled, and I feel like it turns into the same sort of image making over and over again. So I think that, for instance, if you call yourself an artist and your only source of reference is Instagram, where you are literally looking at an algorithm that shows you the same thing that you like over and over again, you're not going to go far. I think, yeah, like the way that you can establish yourself could be from style, or it could just simply be being able to defend your work and your ideas. So it doesn't need to be as serious, but I'm not sure if that answers the question again.
I think that
it's something.
It is a little bit of a loaded question, but you're answering it. You've got it. Right. Does anyone else want to speak about that idea, or just wondering, because it is kind of a emerging artist kind of idea?
I mean, I can jump in on that one. I don't think so. Like, I think if you're like looking for a style, you're like approaching it the wrong way, just like right off the bat. Like, exactly what Biba was saying. Like, if that you just start copying, or you get like really into like what you like, and then you're trying to capture that or whatever. If you're searching for a style, you're like already screwed. It's like something you just got to put the work in. Like, if you keep on making stuff, and like I think like Tracy Emin, this is sort of like the most famous example, where she just like locked herself in a cube in like outside of the Tate or whatever, and then like no internet, no anything. I think she had like a couple books or whatever, like a Lucian Freud book and something else. And then she just like, went to town, just sort of like trying to refigure out what type of work she wanted to make. And she went from being like a, like a realist figurative painter to being like a pretty rough and tumble drawer. So, like her approach to remove herself from, the idea of style, or the idea of, trying to fit yourself into the context of art history, like really allowed her to sort of, become her own, and then really become, like the iconic style that she has now. And, I mean, it's different. Like, if you look at somebody like Jenny Saville, who like talks about in depth, like how she, developed her, or where her inspiration comes from, I guess is a better way. She's also looking at like Lucian Freud and, like all these historical photographs and stuff like that. But then, the work doesn't stop at that point. You don't just look at the reference and then stop. you know, she then talks about her relationship with the camera and, you know, trying to figure out exactly the type of work that she wants to make. So, you know, yeah, I think if you're searching for style, it's bad. You're gonna find it if you just put the work in. But it's hard and it's gonna suck for like a really long time, I think. But you just got to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that the question is quite answered. We see here it says, do you think that originality and style hinder the emerging artist? I think the consensus is yes. And as Miles said earlier, it's really just being an artist is really just about being authentic first and foremost. And I think that kind of wraps that up. Biba, I did not mean to cut you off. I would love to hear the point now. Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. It's been a really amazing opportunity working on Being Plus, meeting these artists, meeting these staff, and at Toronto at their art fair and Propeller Art Gallery, working together to build something that we can hopefully all be proud of. With that, I will bid you all good night. Thank you again for joining. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.